Yo, what is up guys, how are we all doing today? It's FanFic Reader here, and today we are carrying on with Avengers of Steel, Chapter 4, Trial by Fire. Now before this chapter gets in, I've got a couple of things I want to say. Number one is that by the end of this video, I'm going to be making an announcement that I'm going to be starting a new fanfiction to start reading to you guys. Number two is I don't know which one it will be. I'll have a couple of options ready, and I want you guys to decide which one you would prefer. So we'll leave that till the end, but for now, let's just enjoy Chapter 4. Oh, and before I forget, this video is going to be a little bit different from the couple last videos, meaning that they're not going to have like so well detailed like images of like characters and buildings talking to each other, blah blah blah. I'm just like testing it out to see if people prefer the old way or this way, where it's just going to be a slideshow of cool pictures, maybe some background environments to get a better idea. So yeah, I'm going to leave that there. I'll explain more at the end. Anyway, enjoy. Clark looked down from the edge of the building on which he was perched. If he had one thing to say about this place, is that it really looked like somewhere where people would be held against their will. 9 out of 10 kidnappers would approve. It was a dark and uninhabited neighborhood full of abandoned warehouses, just a lot of empty streets and shadowy buildings. The address he took from the kidnapper, Turk Barrett, was the building he was looking at as he was perched on top of another. Like all the others around, it was probably used to store some kind of cargo. It only had 2 floors, big gates so trucks could go in, and a vast area where any kind of thing could be kept. From where he was standing, a normal person wouldn't be able to see anything inside the warehouse. Clark, however, wasn't exactly a normal person. Concentrating his senses, he allowed his vision to focus until his eyes were able to not only see all the way from where he was with absolute clarity, but to also pass through brick walls and see inside the warehouse. He was right about the place. It was housing a lot of cargo. Big storage containers were piled all over across the whole extension of the building. The second floor was reasonably empty, with a few tables and chairs only. It was the most interesting place to look at, since it was where the people were. Clark counted 11 men, some standing guard, some sitting around and playing cards on a table, all armed with rifles and pistols, except one. The only man who wasn't armed was standing alone by the wall, wearing a lab coat, his face worried. He had black hair, Asian traces, and was probably in his late 40s, whoever he was. Though he clearly wasn't one of the kidnapped people for one simple reason: he wasn't chained. Aside from the armed men and the one wearing the lab coat, there were 5 people, all chained to each other, all with terrible appearances. It wasn't their ragged clothes or even the fact they were filthy, it was the blank look on their faces. Like they couldn't even realise what was happening around them. They were drugged out of their minds, and for all appearances, not for the first time. On the upside, they were still there. That was good. They hadn't been moved yet, and now that Clark was there, they wouldn't be, as far as he was concerned, and there weren't enough guns there to stop him from rescuing them. But not yet. Because no matter how much he wanted to fly into that warehouse brick wall, beat down all the armed men and rescue the kidnapped people, he couldn't. Not while he didn't know where the previously kidnapped people had been taken to, so right now he would stay there, quiet, and wait. Jessica Jones picked the lock of her neighbour's apartment with ease. Her skills still very much honed, even if she usually preferred to just break the door down. It wouldn't be very welcoming of her to destroy her neighbour's apartment on the day he moved in. The apartment, like all the others in the building, including hers, was a junkyard. Even worse than hers, since he clearly hadn't cleaned it or put any effort into decorating. No TV, even Malcolm, her other neighbour, the junkie who would constantly sell his own stuff to buy drugs, had a TV. Her attention shifted from the home appliances to personal stuff. The stuff that would hold some more meaning to him, and because of that give her a clue as to who her new neighbour really was. She walked into his room looking around. There were no books anywhere, maybe he would bring them later. His clothes were also pretty normal, simple, nothing fancier than a shirt, and there, under his clothes, bingo! A notebook. She picked it up and opened it, turning it on. It was a cheap computer, probably several years behind the top of the line stuff, but she wasn't interested in how good it was, but what was in it. She got the pen drive from her pocket and loaded it with a simple program to bypass passwords and inserted it. Computers nowadays were a private investigator's holy grail of information. Gain access to one, and you had everything about a person in your fingertips. What kind of likes and dislikes a person had, the kind of hobbies that person enjoyed, the kind of people they had contact with. It was more of a matter of knowing to interpret all that information than to actually have to dig through it all. And Jessica was unnaturally good at doing that. Her neighbour, for example, was named Clark Joseph Kent, 21 years old, adopted and only son of Jonathan Kent and Martha Kent. Originally from... no, that can't be a real name. It wasn't possible. One quick search proved her wrong. Smallville? Jessica exclaimed. Who in their right mind would name a place like this? Well, that wasn't important now, so moving on. Clark was probably trying to become a journalist. He had an incredible amount of articles written and had visited pretty much every single journalism site on the internet. He was also apparently capable of speaking a lot of different languages, or at least he had articles in several languages downloaded on his computer. No college though. Just an obscene number of journalism courses. He enjoyed movies, the classic old ones, but also the kind that nerds usually watch. With a lot of sci-fi, on YouTube his tastes were diverse. He liked to watch culinary shows quite a bit. Maybe he was trying to learn how to cook, perhaps, or just liked to watch food being made. It was the next best thing to do when you didn't have cash or the means to acquire food yourself. His social media accounts were practically existed so he could follow the news, she noticed. He followed every single news vehicle, blogs, reporters, freelance journalists, of every country she could name. Well, that was one way to keep up with what happens in the world, she supposed. The lack of books in the apartment was explained when she found the digital copies on the computer. An absurd number of digital books of every conceivable subject. He had the normal everyday ones, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, but also books about quantum physics, advanced mathematics, medicine, literature, economics, history. The guy had a fucking library in his notebook, and he had, by the looks of it, he at least browsed through all of them. He was either a hoarder or a very smart with a super fast reading capability and insomnia. He had no girlfriend and very few friends by the looks of it, and while there were no pictures on his computer, the desktop background was one with 3 people hugging under a tree, 2 adults and 1 kid. If she had to guess, those were his parents and himself. Sighing, Jessica closed the notebook. There really wasn't anything here that could give her absolute certainty about the guy's character. Then again, she wasn't expecting that. Hoping, yes, but not expecting. She had 2 choices now. She could put everything back, get out, lock the door again, and hopefully the guy would never notice he was there. Or she could sit down and wait for him to come back so she could have a nice chat face to face. Well, in the end, it was a stupid dilemma. Jessica could be subtle when she wanted, but being direct as a cannonball was more her style. Clark didn't have to wait long. Less than 30 minutes later, 3 black cars approached the warehouse and the gate opened up as soon as they could get inside. 12 people got out of the cars, but only 2 of them, a man and a woman, went to the second floor. The other 10 remained close by the cars, rifles prepared, waiting for their return. It was clear as day that those 2 were in command, because the moment they stepped onto the second floor, everyone stood up and turned to look at them. The man in charge barely acknowledged them as turning his eyes to the kidnapped people instead. His cold face was impassive. "What exactly is this?" he asked, a heavy British accent clear to Clark's enhanced hearing, gesturing to the drugged people. "I've asked for subjects. Living subjects. I don't believe those qualify, do they?" Clark had to expect this from a man who kidnapped people for a living. The way he talked about them, as if they were less than things, it made his blood boil. The Asian man wearing a lab coat approached frantic. "I warned them. I told them that those people wouldn't do, that they couldn't survive the experiments in this state." Experiment, Clark thought, realizing that there was more going on here. The British man turned to the doctor. "Did you? Dr. Okamura?" he questioned, raising his eyebrow. He looked at another man, one of the armed ones. "Did he?" The man looked scared, but nodded. "I tried to get better subjects, Bosch, but the Russians control the human traffic in this town," he answered, trying to explain himself. "You said you didn't want to call any attention to what we were doing, so I tried to fly under the radar to take people no one would miss." The boss looked at the doctor. "Are you sure they can't survive?" He hesitated, but answered. "The serum is not stabilized. The shock of the system plus the therapy to raise their adrenaline. If the serum was ready, we could inject it even on someone with a terminal disease, but now, in the condition they are, they'll never make it." "Why isn't it stabilized yet?" I don't have the equipment to do it," Okamura said, fear clear in his voice. "And what exactly do you need, Doctor? I have a contact at Oscorp that can get everything I need by tomorrow. Make the arrangements then. You are responsible for that," the boss said, turning to the armed man again. "As for you, I ordered you to bring me subjects and to do it quietly, and you only did one of those things." Angel, the woman by his side, approached silently, a match held on her lips, and without saying anything, her hand darted and she grabbed the armed man by the throat, lifting him from the ground as if he didn't weigh anything. Clark could only look as she snapped her hand shut and sounds of bone breaking shocking him to his core. "Who is the second in command?" the British man asked, completely calm. One of the other men slowly approached, fear clear on his face. "You are responsible for the next batch of subjects. Find them and bring them quietly, understand? I give you 2 orders. I want them both fulfilled." Angel tossed the dead man on the ground. "Doctor, you have until tomorrow night to get the equipment as I start work on stabilizing the serum. Fail me, and I will find another." He started walking to the stairs, Angel by his side. "As for these junkies, unchain them and burn the place down. Just a bunch of addicts breaking and entering, having a bit of fun. It's not like we own the place." When they were gone down the stairs, it was like the spell was broken, and everybody began to move with a real purpose. The doctor left in a hurry while the armed men started to pour gasoline in the room. Clark watched as the man who appeared to be the boss get into the car and leave the warehouse, just as the men upstairs tossed a match and the flames began. He had a choice to make now. He could chase the man who appeared to be in charge, hoping that he would eventually lead him to the place where they were conducting these experiments on people, except that there was no guarantee he would go there, or that he would be talking under duress, or that he was even in charge of this operation to begin with. He could also chase the doctor and try and intimidate him to talking, but again, there was no guarantee he would talk, or that he would even know where those people were being held, since he was apparently just a pawn. Or he could save those people from burning to death, find Dr. Okamura tomorrow, and then follow him and the equipment he would acquire to the main base. As far as Clark was concerned, there was only one choice. When the cars began leaving the warehouse, Clark jumped, reaching more than enough height to cross the street and get to the roof of the burning building. But instead of controlling the landing, Clark made sure to fall down with force, breaking the roof and getting to the second floor in one go. The flames were already going strong, fed by the gasoline and all the wood. He could feel the strong heat waves, the sound of the fire thundering in his ears, but the flames were not near and hot enough to bother him as he passed through them all to get to the kidnapped people. He didn't know if it was the heat or the effort of all the drugs passing, but the people began to awake as the flames got closer. That was not good. Clark could take them all with no difficulty, but panicking people always made things harder. So before they did something stupid like trying to run aimlessly, he dashed through the fire and got to them, losing no time as he picked two of them up. Looking around, Clark's eye spotted a big wooden table close to him. With one kick, he launched it across the room directly at the windows on the other side of the flames. The glass offered no resistance as the table smashed through them, falling with loud bangs on the street. Losing no time, Clark jumped through the broken window. He landed on the street, the two men still in his arms, and ran to the other side, putting them on the ground at a safe distance. Then he flew back into the warehouse in a split second, doing the same thing with two others. When he came back for the last one, however, things changed. A part of the roof collapsed, falling right in front of the windows, because he could simply pass through with speed and brute force, but the kidnapped woman in his arms would likely get hurt. He stopped for a second, assessing the situation, when he noticed the terrified look of the woman. "Oh God, save me from hell. Please, 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 I swear this is the last time I'm going to use her." She began to speak, her nails scratching him with enough force to break the skin, if he was human. Well, he couldn't go forward, backwards or down, Clark thought. He could always go up. Covering the woman with his body, he flew, crashing a hole through the ceiling, rising into the sky, looking down, meeting the eyes of the amazed woman. "Are you an angel?" she whispered, true wonder on her eyes. Clark smiled, floating down to the street. He needed to take these people to a hospital. It was almost time for the sun to rise when Clark got home. After he rescued the kidnapped people, he had to take them to a hospital to make sure they weren't hurt. Physically they were fine, but they were still drug addicts. Heroin users, apparently. Clark sighed. He saved them from the kidnappers and the fire, but in the end, they would have to be the ones to save themselves. The woman, at least, seemed very certain when she signed her name to begin treatment on a free rehab program that one of the nurses recommended. Apparently, she saw a sign from God. Clark really hoped she would go through with her. He was tired. His Kryptonian physiology allowed him to go sometimes days without sleeping as long as he had a healthy dose of sunlight during the day. His body wouldn't get worn out, but that didn't mean his mind wouldn't. And with the day he had, all he wanted to do right now was sleep for a few hours until he could begin his search for Dr. Okamura. Clark was almost beside himself with relief when he turned the key and opened the door, until he saw a woman sitting inside his apartment. "Oh God, please no." "Welcome back," his neighbour greeted, putting down her cell phone. "I was beginning to think the big city swallowed you up." Slowly, still wishing that this was an unusual hallucination, he entered and closed the door, resting his head on it for a second before turning. "What is it with you people and boundaries?" Clark asked his neighbour. She frowned for a second before getting it. "Malcolm? Yeah, he does that sometimes when he's high." "What about you? Are you high too?" "Oh no, I strictly stick to drinking," she answered, taking a swig out of her flask to prove her point. Clark sighed. "Look, I had a long day and a long night, and I'm pretty sure this day won't be any shorter. So as much as I want to meet my neighbours, I kind of want to sleep more, so please..." "Jessica Jones," she answered. "Please, Miss Jones, let me rest. We can talk tomorrow." She snorted. Clark was not amused. "Miss?" Jessica chuckled, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe it. "You really are a Boy Scout, huh?" "Not really, just being polite, unlike someone." "Yeah, I've never been polite. The whole concept kind of pisses me off, really." "I'm seeing that." He opened the door and gestured to it. "Ma would be very disappointed in me, though, if I forgot my manners, no matter how much I want to. She seems like a wise woman, so maybe I'll take a page out of her book and give this manners thing a try." She walked to him, pushing the door closed again, never taking her eyes off him. "How are you doing? Hard night?" "It must have been. You smell like a bonfire." Clark looked at her seriously for the first time. "Passed close to a building on fire," he told her. Nothing bad, I hope. No one got hurt, I'm sure." "That's a relief. I mean, it could be worse, right? Like, I saw a guy being run over tonight, right here in front of Luke's bar." Her voice was laced with an obvious fake surprise, like she was just playing a role. And then she got serious and eyed him without blinking. From where I was standing, It seemed more like the guy ran the car over. Clark felt his blood turn to ice. She had seen him? She had seen him using his abilities? His face didn't move an inch, but his heart was beating faster than ever. For the first time since childhood, someone had seen him doing something he shouldn't be able to, and recognized him, and he didn't know what to do. Really? He inquired, trying to gain time until his brain could function again. Sounds like quite the story. Jessica Jones was still looking at him, still unblinking. It was quite amazing. I mean, the guy saved some dude from being kidnapped, beat the shit out of bad guys, stopped a moving vehicle with his body. I was actually waiting to see if he would turn green. He didn't know what to say, and the woman just wouldn't blink. She kept looking at him with those big eyes of hers, and if he was human, he knew he would be sweating right now. Sounds unlikely, he mumbled. Are you sure you didn't see things wrong? I mean, in the dark, sometimes our vision... Oh, fuck it, she exclaimed, suddenly almost making Clark jump back. It was you. I know it, and you know it. Let's just move on with this shit. Clark was actually paralyzed. His body wouldn't respond, and his mind was yelling at him one thing. Deny, deny, deny. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, and he knew he sounded so fake that even the most naive person in the world wouldn't fall for that. Oh, you don't? She approached as close as she could without touching him. So are you going to look me in the eye and tell me you weren't that guy? I don't know what you're talking about, Clark repeated automatically, and he immediately wanted to punch himself. Her eyes acquired a dangerous look, and then, unexpectedly, she seemed to deflate. Look, I get it alright. You don't know me, I broke into your apartment, and now I'm confronting you about something you just don't go around telling. She eyed him, carefully making herself look non-threatening, but I swear I'm not a danger to you, okay? You can admit it. Clark looked at her for a long moment, not moving, not reacting. Then he said, I don't know what you're talking. That is when she punched him. He saw her muscles contracting. He saw her fist moving. Any other day he could have easily dodged or defended himself, but not that day. That day he was so surprised by what was happening that he was stuck to the ground as if cement had been poured over him, and because of that he was powerless to stop her when her hand collided with his chin. The result couldn't have been any other. Fuck! She yelled, clutching her broken hand. You broke my hand! You just broke my hand! If Clark was facing difficulties to think before, now he was reaching a whole other level of mental paralysis. You punched me! He started, taking his own hand to his face as if he was hurt. An over-delayed response that wouldn't fool anybody. It's not my fault. It is your fault. You wouldn't admit it. Admit to what? He replied. You just don't know. You just don't know how to make a fist. Sometimes when you punch wrong, your fingers break. Without knowing what to do, he went to the fridge and opened it, looking for something cold she could put on her hand. Oh, I know how to punch. I do it all the time. In fact, I just punched you with enough force to make your jaw cross the fucking street if you were just some ordinary guy. With that, she followed him to the fridge, grabbing it with her left and unbroken hand, and then lifting it from the ground. There was a moment of complete silence. Clark was speechless. Her arm was extended. Her hand was barely holding on to the old and very heavy fridge, yet she was lifting it off the ground with no effort at all. Just like he could do with his Kryptonian strength. He turned to face her, shock clear on his expression. That's when the last thing she said reached his brain. Wait a minute, did you just say you could have launched me across the street? Jessica dropped the fridge without a care. It would, if you weren't able to stop a moving car with your chest. And if you were wrong, you could have killed me. I knew I was right, I'm not blind. I saw you clearly from the fire escape in front of Luke's bar. What the hell were you doing there, stalking me? I wasn't stalking I wasn't stalking you. I saw you by accident. That kind of shit tends to happen when you stop a fucking car with your body in the middle of the street. Clark was breathing hard now, unable to keep up with the events of the night. How could something like this happen in his first day in New York? He tried to calm himself, and sometimes the best way to do that was to fall into a routine. So he stopped worrying about himself for a second and focused on her, looking at Jessica's hand with his x-ray vision. Your hand is fractured. It's probably not serious, but let me. She pushed her hand back. Forget the hand, it'll be fine by the afternoon, she said, and he wondered if rapid healing was also a part of her abilities. Now, can we start again? Jessica looked at him seriously. He met her eyes for a moment and nodded. Yeah, I guess we can. She seemed to calm down when he agreed to talk. So, the guy I saw. Yeah, it was me, Clark admitted, since there was no reason to lie now. She nodded and then slapped his shoulder with her good hand. What the fuck were you thinking? She exclaimed. He was taken aback. I'm sorry? Using your powers in the middle of the street getting involved with criminal bullshit? What if someone saw you? You're lucky I was the only one there. He sighed and took his hand to his face. I wasn't thinking. The guy needed help. I helped, wouldn't you? Jessica didn't even hesitate. No! Do you know why? Because I'm not an idiot. Really? If you were in there in a position to help, you wouldn't have done anything. You would have just turned your back and let them drag that guy away. Yeah, I would. Clark met her eyes for a long while, assessing her. I don't believe you, he said, after a time, his voice heavy with certainty. She seemed affronted. And why's that? Clark pointed at her. You're here, aren't you? For someone who doesn't care about helping people, you sure as hell looked worried about me. That's different, she answered after a few seconds of silence. How? It just is, okay? She exploded, suddenly looking furious. Look, you don't get it. You're young. You're powerful. I bet you think nothing can hurt you, right? I bet you think you're fucking invincible. Helping those people? Well, you aren't. That's the thing. Nobody is. There's always someone, something worse out there. And if you look for it, you'll find it, or it will find you. Clark didn't back down. He just held his eyes on her. Calm, thoughtful. Is that what happened to you? He said finally. By the reaction on her face, he made the right assumption. Jessica closed her hand into a fist, true fury in her eyes. That is none of your business, she replied slowly, and then she breathed, controlling herself. You know what? I did my part. Listen to me, don't listen to me. I don't care, it's your life. She turned and walked to the door. I can't stop, Clark declared. Those guys I beat, they were working for someone. Someone worse. They're kidnapping people on the streets for some kind of experiment. I don't know what they're doing, or where they're doing it. But I'm going to find out. I have to. Why? Why you? Why don't you just give this to the police? And tell them what? That I stopped a moving vehicle with my chest? That I threatened the driver until he demanded he was working for some guy who was kidnapping people for experiments? Do you really think someone is going to listen to this? If they don't arrest me on the spot, which they probably would, they're simply going to close their eyes and pretend nothing happened. There are people dying out there right now, alone, scared, in pain. If I can help them, it's my responsibility to do that. Jessica opened the door and looked at him one last time. You gotta do what you gotta do. I did my part. Well, and with that, she walked out and closed the door. Jessica let her body rest against the closed door for a minute, closing her eyes, breathing deep. He didn't understand. He couldn't. Just as she couldn't before it happened to her. If he kept doing this, putting himself in danger's way, some bad shit was going to happen to him sooner or later. Just like it happened to her. It was funny, she thought. How things changed so quickly. Minutes before he arrived, her only worry was to know if this guy was one of the good ones, or if he was one of the lowlives out there. The ones who abused their powers for their own gain, no matter who got hurt. Other than that, she really didn't give a damn, as long as he wasn't a threat to her. But how exactly could she turn a blind eye to the fact that she was basically looking at her past self? She would have to be a tremendous hypocrite and an idiot for not realizing that. She wasn't the first, and she definitely wasn't going to be the last. Was this fear talking? Absolutely. She knew that, even if she didn't like to admit it. The only time she tried to use her gifts to help people, her reward was a visit to hell itself. So there was the question. If she could go back in time and stop herself from trying to help people, would she? She didn't know. What she did know was that she couldn't let another person go through what she had gone through. Not if there was something she could do to help. Sometimes Jessica felt like a piece of shit. She didn't want to feel like that anymore. Clark scratched his eyes, twice as tired as he was when he arrived. What a night he was having. He looked around and took his notebook. He wouldn't be able to sleep now, not after this. Better start working then. Dr. Okamura wouldn't just drop out of the sky, though the moment he turned on his computer, the door opened. Jessica Jones looked at him, conflicted for a moment. Her expression changed, and suddenly her eyes were alive. What do you have to go on? She asked. Natasha was feeling slightly irritated, looking at her impassive face. The manager of Arctic Cargo was not being helpful, nor was he being completely polite. Though Natasha supposed that was her own fault. Every person had to be handled differently when it comes to asking questions. Most men, and quite a few women, were partial to her charms. Being incredibly beautiful and trained in seduction made this skill very useful in her field. Others responded better to gentleness instead of seduction, nice words, compliments, a smile. Owen Connor was neither. Oh, he was attracted to her. She knew that the second she entered the room. Not exactly difficult to notice when the man looked at her and ran his eyes from head to toe with barely concealed lust. Uncomfortable, maybe, but she was already more than used to it. And it was a weakness she thought she could use. Her mistake, the man was attracted to her. Yes. But he was also a misogynist and self-important individual, so because of that, no matter how much he lusted over her, using that particular tactic wasn't getting her anywhere. because at the same time he also didn't respect her enough to consider her an authority. She would really have to rectify that. Mr. Connor, she called again, trying to gain his attention as he continued to boss around everyone in his office as if she weren't there. Liam! The man yelled, ignoring her, giving a document to the young man who passed. Take this to my secretary, please, and remind her that I still want my coffee. He finally turned to her, barely looking at her face. Look, Miss Romanoff, I'm a busy man. I can't just stop working now to answer a bunch of nonsense questions. Give me a call and I'll try and make some time, but now is really not possible. Natasha raised an eyebrow. Without saying anything, she got up from her chair, walked to the door of his office, closed it loudly, and there was a sudden silence in the workplace. Maybe I didn't make myself clear, Mr. Connor, Natasha said, looking at him with cold eyes. You are being questioned about a theft made by one of your employees. A theft of alien technology. She walked back to his table but didn't sit down. If you refuse to answer those questions right now, I will arrest you as an accomplice. I will take you to an underground facility and then I will ask the same questions again. Except I won't be so polite about it. She held her cold gaze without blinking, seeing his attitude suddenly changing. I have rights. You'll have rights when I say you have rights, Natasha interrupted. I'm not with the police, Mr. Connor. I'm not a cop. I am a spy and an assassin who occasionally gets to work as an interrogator. Now, which role I'll play right now depends on you. So, are you going to answer my questions or not? Natasha could see a trickle of sweat running down his face as he nodded. The role model of cooperation now. Good, she said as she sat down again. Now, about this employee of yours, James Bartholomew Olsen. What can you tell me about him? Mr. Connor breathed deeply, trying to calm himself. Look, you gotta understand that Arctic Cargo isn't some big company. We have our slice of work with explorers and scientists and that kind of thing. But this contract with the Canadian Army was big. And I mean big enough to pay the bills for the rest of the year. We couldn't lose it. Romanoff nodded, urging him to go on. Now, it's not easy to get clearance to work with the Army. Lots of bureaucracy and a lot of time wasted. We have this clearance, but the size of the project demanded more people than we had, so you hired people without clearance and faked their documents, said Natasha. Mr. Connor nodded, looking afraid. I don't care about the laws you broke. That's not why I'm here. This is between the Canadian Army and you. I'm asking questions about the specific employee you hired. Okay, so what do you want to know? Did you meet him personally? She asked. Yes, I was the one who hired those guys. Can't say I remember everything about them, but I definitely remember this one. This interested Natasha. Why is that? Well, for one thing, the guy was working on Cassidy Pub. It's just a little restaurant on the side of the road. A lot of truckers stop by there to eat and rest. I was there one day minding my own business when a drunk trucker had a brilliant idea of groping the waitress. This guy did not approve. They fought. Well, fighting is a strong word. The guy tossed the drunk out like he was a kitten, tossed him to the ground, grabbed him by the back of his coat, and then carried the guy all the way to his truck, left him there to cool off. Strong lad, seemed nice, so I offered him a job. I mean, if he could carry a guy out like that, he wouldn't have trouble with a few boxers. Do you know anything else about him? I didn't ask anything else because, well, frankly, I didn't care. He was just a guy. Natasha didn't say anything for a moment, just thinking about the new information she had. A pattern was forming in her mind. A man who liked to help people, yes, that was consistent with what Dr. Foster and Miss Lewis had told her. But there was something else now. The man that she was almost certain was an alien was working in a pub? She knew he worked for Arctic Cargo, that was why she was there after all. But this particular job could have been just a means to get closer to the ship. But working at a restaurant wasn't. That indicated a level of knowledge about humanity that not even Thor had yet. This alien was here, on Earth, for a long time, and they never heard anything about him. This changes things. Maybe he was less of an invader and more along the lines of an illegal immigrant. Funny thing though, not really related to the guy, but definitely related to the truck he tossed, Mr. Connor added, laughing, breaking Natasha's concentration. After that happened, the guy still tried to come back inside. Well, I mean, that's not true. He went back, but didn't enter. Too afraid, I guess. But he kept yelling about some pretty nasty things from outside. The thing is, after a while of this really annoying shit yelling non-stop, there was a huge, massive, big wind and then a big crashing sound. What happened? Natasha wondered. Karma! That's what, Mr. Connor cackled. Some huge pine tree somehow got caught by the wind and flew right through the guy's truck. The thing looked like it was a pincushion for trees. Natasha really doubted that the wind was responsible for that. Well, he was probably still a good guy, she thought, but everyone had their limits. She would do well to remember that. Okay guys, I will leave it here as this is the end of Chapter 4 of Avengers of Steel. Thank you very much for listening, and as I said before, I do have a small announcement to make. I've been trying to think about what's the best story to go with next, because I have 3 options for a new story to go with. Now, these won't replace Avengers of Steel, they'll just take up a slot every now and again while I upload chapters to them. Now, the 3 stories are as follows. Harry Potter, Squatter. This is a crossover between Harry Potter and Percy Jackson. It's one of the most favoured stories out there. And in case you didn't know, there's more fan fictions about Harry Potter than literally anything else by a good 400,000. So it's very popular, so you're probably going to see more options for them than you'd think. And then there is option number 2, The Last King, which is a crossover between Percy Jackson and Game of Thrones. It's very well loved. I've read the story. It's a very well put together story. It's a fun read, and I think it would be fun to hear the concept of Percy Jackson, a demigod, being in Game of Thrones. Trust me, it's worth looking into. And the last option is The Last Soldier of Krypton. This is basically a reimagining of the Superman story, where he's not a regular everyday Boy Scout. He is a cold-hearted war veteran and has been a soldier for his entire life. He's as old as Wonder Woman. He's a better fighter. He is a soldier down to the core when he lands on Earth, and that affects how he interacts with the Justice League, with humanity, etc, etc. Also, and this one would be a bit of a stretch because I've been doing this one on my own, what if Superman found himself in the Warhammer 40k universe? Like, dropped onto some planet in the modern day Warhammer 40k universe. How would Superman react to the Imperium of Man, and what would he do about it? Just food for thought. So I'll leave those options there for you. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. It's been Fanfic Reader here. If you want me to do a specific story that wasn't one of the options, then please let me know in the comments down below. Please vote for which story you would like to hear out of the other 3. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you later.